AMD stock had an interesting day today after some supposedly great news came out. But if you've been following this channel, you would have been ahead of the curve. Nvidia also has various analysts releasing their pre-earnings results, and I think we should talk about them. So let's get started with today's episode.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for the subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode.
All right, so let's start off with AMD. We can see the stock was up over 1% before the market closed, but at one point the stock was up nearly 3%. The main reason is we started to see some articles that Microsoft is going to offer cloud customers AMD alternative to Nvidia. And the market goes crazy. They're like, hey, look, we can see now that AMD is going to be eating up Nvidia's lunch. And this is obviously great news for AMD. And let me just say, yes, I do believe this is great news from AMD when they announced this a few months ago. Actually, they announced this, we can see Microsoft announced this on November 15th of 2023, that their clouding service is going to be featuring AMD's flagship MI300X GPU. We also heard about this during AMD's December event when they finally announced the MI300X that Microsoft was going to be a customer of theirs. So obviously this kind of seems like just the market got a little bit too excited about this news and then ended up figuring out that, hey, look, this isn't necessarily new news. Now, there could be something extra that could be coming out of here. One of the articles was talking about supercluster using MI300X, and that's something that we personally haven't heard about in this channel here. For example, these virtual machines here are going to be using 8 times AMD Instinct MI300X. We haven't seen any virtual machines that are using more than this when looking at AMD solutions. When we've looked at NVIDIA solutions, we can go and talk about hundreds and thousands of GPUs, but we haven't seen that the case for AMD. So maybe there might be something inside of this already told news that might be benefiting AMD in the future. I don't believe that's the case, but there's obviously the probability that that is going to happen. Now, sticking here with Microsoft and AMD, Microsoft is having an event starting on May 21st, so next week, and this is going to be their Microsoft Build 2024. And here's where they talk of, pretty much talk to developers on how you can use Microsoft's clouding solutions, Microsoft's PC solutions, Microsoft's AI solutions to develop new opportunities in the future. And obviously right now, the whole touch is about AI. Before we go any further, we are now on the road to 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Thank you all for the crazy support. So if you haven't and are enjoying the content, make sure to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button. Finally, if you want to support the channel a little bit more, make sure to check out my special offer at fool.com/Jose. Now back to today's episode. And very similar to any other event out there, you can kind of find out who is presenting and who's going to talk about some of their new products. So if you take a closer look at their session catalog, we can see that AMD has 3 sessions here. So the first one is secure data processing with AMD confidential virtual machines on Databricks. So nothing too crazy here. This is more talking about their CPU solutions, mainly their EPYC processors. Now the other 2 that might be interesting for AI accelerators, we can see on Wednesday, May 22, we can see that deploy Hugging Face models on Microsoft's clouding solution powered by AMD's ROCm software. So ROCm software is kind of their CUDA version of NVIDIA. So we can see here we're going to talk about AMD's MI300X V5 virtual machines. And those are actually the same ones we've talked about previously. So that is why I believe there's not necessarily new news here. It's just going to be a recycle of, hey, look, we're going to have some form of alternative, some form of other players here in the AI space. I don't think by any means this means that AMD is eating Nvidia's lunch. I think Microsoft just wants to, they're a huge cloud server provider, right? So they need to have varieties for their customers. Some customers want to work on AMD, some customers want to work on Nvidia, some customers want to work on some other ASIC solutions. So Microsoft being this cloud server provider, they need to have all the flavors that everybody wants to taste. Obviously, everybody wants Nvidia right now, so that's the biggest market share that they probably have, but some people might have AMD, so they have to build up these virtual machines there. The other thing that we are seeing is AMD is also having an optimized productivity by meeting next level demands on AI era. And we can see AMD is also going to be talking about their MI300 through an open collaborative software ecosystem in their AMD ROCm. So this is going to talk a little bit more about that kind of partnership with the AMD and Microsoft. So we can see there are some ways AMD is going to benefit from this, but I don't believe it was anything to drive the stock price. Now, pretty similar, if you kind of Google Nvidia in this session, you're going to get a lot of Nvidia sessions very similar to AMD. Now, one that I'm pretty excited about is kind of staying here with Microsoft and the AI market. On June 4th to June 6th, they're going to have their high performance computing and AI infrastructure summit. And this is going to be with Microsoft and AMD. Why I believe this might be great news is here we can see that the corporate vice president on architecture personnel of AMD is going to be talking on day 2nd, and their keynote is going to talk about AMD vision and roadmap. So maybe we might hear a little bit more about some of the upcoming products that AMD might be sending over to Microsoft. So if you are an AMD investor, I do believe this is probably a better keynote to take a closer look at, because anytime you hear a roadmap, this is something as an investor you need to be familiar with. So again, this is something we've talked about many times before about this partnership with Microsoft and AMD. You guys know AMD is my second biggest position, only behind Nvidia right now. And sometimes it gets me annoyed, right? Because seeing these tweets online and kind of really these investors that have been following AMD for a long time are showcasing that this is something revolutionary. But if you really want the best news out there for the semiconductor space, make sure to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button, as you will never be, you might, but you won't be surprised to a lot of the things that maybe the market figures out later in time. So now the second company, obviously, we're going to take a closer look at is Nvidia. Nvidia is still sitting over $900. This upcoming week is earnings, and later, either tomorrow or Sunday, I will be releasing my earnings preview and what we should take a closer look at. But like I mentioned at the beginning of this intro, we are getting a lot of analysts release kind of their pre-earning results, and it just gets my brain flowing of things that we should keep a closer eye out as investors. So the first one we're getting is from Bank of America Analysts, and they talk a little bit about how they expect Nvidia to deliver strong Q1 results compared to the overall consensus estimate. So right off the bat, they do believe that Nvidia will beat the guidance or the average expectations here that we're seeing by analysts, which is roughly $24.6 billion. Bank of America believes that they're going to get somewhere around $26 billion this year. But they do believe that there is going to be some volatility in Nvidia in the near term. And they talk about different factors. And one of those factors that could enhance volatility is including the deceleration for the July quarter ahead of Blackwell. And this is something that we have heard a lot about in the past, where investors might be worried that because the Blackwell is expected to come out in a few quarters, a lot of customers are going to slow down their purchasing right now. And I don't believe that's the case. And the reason is companies like Microsoft, like all these open AIs, like everybody developing AI solutions, they need to have the best of the best product right now. If not, they're going to be left behind. So there's no reason for them to wait for the next generation. And all these companies have plenty and plenty of data centers that they can upgrade. So yes, they might upgrade some of their data centers into the H200 right now. And next, they can upgrade to the Blackwell 100, the Blackwell 200, and they can just send out those H200 to some other systems that still need to be upgraded. So it's not like they throw away the chips, right? So some people believe that, hey, look, they throw away the H100, they throw away the H200. No, right? There's plenty of systems that are using many generations ago of NVIDIA GPUs that they can kind of swap out, maybe not easily, but can swap out to increase the performance of those other servers, right? So it's not necessarily money wasted. But in the scenario that we do get some weakness in the upcoming earnings, I personally believe that is a buying opportunity because that's going to be just short-term pain. I don't think that's going to be a long-term pain because Blackwell is going to be the biggest product this company has. So right now, what I believe is if there is any weakness coming up, it's going to be a weakness that could trigger a sell-off. Now, like I mentioned previously, I don't believe the weakness will happen. But if it does happen, it will trigger a massive sell-off. And during that massive sell-off is when I think I'm going to hit the hammer and increase my position on my number one holding already. So just sharing my thoughts for those that want to know how I see where the company can head in the upcoming earnings. Now, some other things that the Bank of America analyst believes that are contributing factors are the volatility in China. We hear that Nvidia might be shipping out the H20 and the H2 to China, which are going to meet regulations, export regulation rules. But these kinds of products tend to have lower margins from time to time, so this can more normalize the gross margins. The other thing is just gross margins in general. Bank of America believes that they're going to be peaking in Q1 of this year and start to kind of decline a little bit. So they believe the peak will be around 77% in Q1 and decline to 75 or 76 in Q2. And obviously a decline in gross margins means there's a little bit more pricing pressure. There's a little bit of more unfavorable mix. Maybe certain solutions have less gross margins than others, like those in China. And obviously if you start to improve your supply chain, there's more supply improvements, so pricing power doesn't stick as strong, so you tend to see some form of weaker margins as well. But 75 to 76, in my opinion, is still pretty impressive for Nvidia. Now, the other one I want to say is Oppenheimer. They did kind of report some news as well. They believe that Nvidia will beat and raise this upcoming quarter due to the crazy amount of appetite for AI accelerators. They believe, though, revenue will be roughly $25 billion versus the $24.5 that analysts expect. So they do believe a nice beat, obviously because of the overall improvements in supply chain of the H100. I personally believe that they will be as well. They did increase their earnings per share outlook for this year and next year, so that's pretty bullish. But they still, and they maintain a $1,100 price target for Nvidia. Just for, I don't think if I mentioned it, Bank of America also creates a $1,100 price for Nvidia. But most of these analysts believe that even if the company outperforms or beats, stock price really wouldn't move too much because a lot of investor expectation is expecting this company to beat and raise. And I believe that's the case right now with the stock sitting at 924. I'm saying in the long term, this can be a very bullish company. In the short term, a lot is expected. And personally, like myself, we are expecting this to beat earnings and revenue and to give us a strong guidance. Now the real question is how much has been priced in. So even if they do good, if a lot of this has been priced in, and I do believe right now the priced in is getting a little bit better because everybody's getting more familiar with it, but we might not even see much of a stock movement. Obviously, we'll have to wait for May 22nd, but overall, I'm still very bullish in the long term of things. So the final analyst we're going to talk about is Citi. They project that Nvidia will actually have $24 billion in revenue this quarter. This is one of the few analysts that are below expectations or the average expectations. So pretty interesting here to see some still on the maybe not on the bearish side, but not as bullish as others. But on the other hand, they do expect for the July quarter, which is their second quarter, that revenue will be roughly $27.5 billion, which is higher than what analysts expect on average. So they are kind of a little bit bearish or not as bullish this quarter, but they're a little bit more bullish next quarter. Overall, though, they do expect smaller beats versus prior few quarters on larger numbers. And that makes sense, right? Like I mentioned, all these analysts are starting to finally understand how this company works, what are their revenue potentials, what are supply chain potentials as well, that their expectations and guidance are getting a little bit closer. So it's going to be a little bit harder for Nvidia to kind of beat at the numbers it was beating before. Now, some of the things that they believe investors should focus is the GB200. I mentioned that's where I'm super excited. The potential air pocket in AI demand in the second half of 2024. Another analyst that believes there might be some weakness here in the second half. Again, if there is, I believe that's going to be the best buying opportunity ever. If there's not, I think we're just going to keep chugging along, as well as kind of maybe the impact of gross margins in the future. Another thing that is pretty important that I believe is something investors should kind of start looking at is power constraints on AI data centers. This is something we've heard about from other big tech leaders, that the power market right now is what's going to be holding out a lot of AI data centers in the future. The final thing is sovereign AI and the Chinese market. So, I mean, there's a lot to cover in there. I hope I shared my thoughts pretty well so you guys can understand where I'm coming from. Very bullish for this quarter. But again, now the real question is how much has been priced in. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Take care, have a good day, and see you next time.